Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this Fingal Chamber event. I'm going to make some introductory comments and just update you on the Chamber, and then highlight today's event. As the region's largest business organisation, Fingal Chamber helps businesses of all sizes to grow and develop by providing members with opportunities to influence policy, connect with businesses and professionals, upskill their staff, promote their business, and trade internationally. The Chamber is committed to providing local economic development and enhancing the economic prosperity and quality of life across the region, while ensuring local businesses have a competitive advantage. The Chamber was established back in 1994. It's an accredited chamber for the entire Fingal region, stretching from Balbriggan in the north to Santry in the south, Howth in the east to Blanchardstown in the west. Chamber members represent a wide section of industries and activities, from individual sole traders through to large multinational companies. Members are drawn from various industry pools, including aviation, information technology, logistics, hospitality, professional services, retail, agri-foods, and beyond. Over the past couple of years, the Chamber has been revitalised with a new team and fresh branding. The Chamber now employs a growing team of professionals who work closely with central and local government, industry stakeholders, and the community to maximise the economic prosperity of Fingal. Last year, 2019, the Chamber team lobbied on infrastructure projects, including Irish Water, Metrolink, Bus Connects, the DART expansion, commercial rates, and on trade, especially Brexit, and improving connectivity with Seattle, USA. The Chamber also hosted business briefings with the then Tánaiste and Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Cooney, the National Transport Authority, and Dublin Airport. And in the last 6 months of the year, delivered 387 training days through our Skillnet. This year, 2020, from March, a lot of our plans changed, with the Chamber quickly adapting to working with COVID-19. We seamlessly moved the Chamber staff to working virtually for most of our services. We reacted to the new reality by changing our focus to helping businesses survive 2020. Physical events may have disappeared, but we maintained an active agenda, resulting in a broad set of initiatives and achievements. We ran a series of surveys to determine the impact that COVID-19 and the associated restrictions had on businesses through Fingal, and this data has helped to support the lobbying which we and our colleagues in Chambers Ireland continue to do. Issues covered included revenue, HR problems, invoices, debts, and the challenges of reopening. The data derived from the surveys has been very useful in a number of ways, in extending the commercial rates waiver, in getting support from central fund to assist the local authorities, which are suffering a budgetary shortfall, in shifting the government's focus from loans to grants, for extending access and funds to grants, for creating a grant fund for sole traders, and for supporting the temporary wage subsidy scheme and the employment wage subsidy scheme, and in seeking a VAT reduction across all sectors, and in particular for us, tourism and hospitality. And we appreciate and thank the government for the actions they have taken to support business and the economy. The Chamber continues to support local authority initiatives, including the Fingal In It Together Shop Local campaign and the See It, Say It, the new confidential text service allows the public to report incidents to Gardaí that have been and has been rolled out in Swords. We are also assisting with the Fingal Free Outdoor Public Wi-Fi project, which is set to officially go live in 2020. Tourism and hospitality are key sectors for employment in Fingal and have been severely impacted by the pandemic. We have worked with Fingal County Council on establishing an active tourism stakeholder group, which led to the council delivering an advertising campaign to encourage tourists and staycationers to visit Fingal during the summer season, and is now set to focus on the long-term strategy for the sector. Following the nationwide restrictions, the Chamber pivoted towards delivering online events, and we held a number of webinars on topics like the budget, Brexit, human resources, and wellness. Also, our Skillnet has adapted to the changing demands. We organised 2 business recovery programs, in addition to promoting virtual selling skills, plus leadership and people management courses. In 2020, the Fingal Chamber Skillnet has exceeded expectations. We delivered to over 550 employees across 130 companies. It has also recently launched a Skills Connect initiative, which prepares employees who were displaced due to COVID for new career prospects. Recently, we hosted an intensive customs procedures and systems course, and 5 of the attendees are now employed by one of our local logistics companies. Social responsibility is incredibly important, and from this year and going forward, we have committed 10% of Chamber profits to the Chamber Community Fund. This new program has just launched, and we look forward to awarding our first grants in early 2021. While our focus this year has been on short-term survival, we also did a lot of work on the Chamber 5-year strategy, which is now available for member input and consideration. We have consolidated our position as the 3rd largest chamber in Ireland, and with the growth and diversity of Fingal, there's lots of opportunity for growth of both membership and services. In the background, we moved to new offices at Dublin Airport Central in January. This was a strategic move to reflect the growth of the Chamber and position us for long-term continuous growth. And following a consultation with members and stakeholders at the end of the year, we will change our title from Fingal Dublin Chamber to Fingal Chamber. This recognised the strength of the Fingal brand and will bring us in line with the County Council and other key stakeholders. This event, so we've organised this event for the government to brief businesses in Fingal on the work to support the regional economy. Firstly, we have the pleasure of having an address from our guest speaker, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A by myself, and then some closing remarks from Anthony Cooney, Chief Executive of Fingal Chamber. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome Tánaiste and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and Dublin West TD, Leo Varadkar, to address you. Thanks, Leo, and welcome.
Thanks very much, Bill, and love the Christmas tree in the background. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm kind of curious. Well, my curiosity has been spiked by hearing that you're going to change your name to Fingal Chamber rather than Fingal Dublin Chamber, because when I was a member of Fingal County Council, I was one of the advocates for changing it to Dublin Fingal or Fingal Dublin, because I've never, even though I'm born and bred in Dublin 15, I've never fully identified the Fingal identity. I always felt that was somewhere up there north of the Talca, and we were Dubs, but sure, what the heck. I know your decision, and I'm sure it's the right one. What I've kind of found during the last couple of months and during the pandemic is that because we can't meet in person, making a speech over a screen really doesn't work. So I've kind of moved to slideshows, which I think is just a bit better in this format. So really it's just going to set out where we are economically and 1 or 2 things that I think will be of relevance to your members, particularly in relation to Fingal. So, okay, so I think that graph just kind of gives you an idea of where we are in terms of jobs, number of jobs in the country after the global financial crisis and the recession and the banking crisis and all that. We kind of fell from 2.25 million jobs down to 1.86 in 2012, and then recovered very well after that, to the point where at the end of last year, just before the pandemic, there were nearly 2.4 million people working in Ireland. Now, depending on how you measure it, and there's different ways of measuring it, the number of people at work now has fallen to about 2 million. And that's really as a consequence of the pandemic, which is a big fall. But we believe a rapid recovery is possible, and our objective will be to get back to that level of employment, if not full employment, by the end of 2023. The good thing is that we went into this recession in a much better place than the last one. We don't have a banking crisis. We don't have a public financial fiscal crisis. And we went in with unemployment around 4.7%, but in reality much lower because most of the people were in between jobs. Long-term unemployment was less than 2%. We'd been running a budget surplus for 2 years. Our debt was high but falling, and we had a rainy day fund of 1.5 billion euros. So came into this year prepared for a big economic hit, which we thought would be Brexit. Turned out to be a pandemic. But we're in a good position, and that allowed us to do things that we otherwise would have struggled to do, like the pandemic unemployment payments, like the wage subsidy scheme, and all of those other financial supports for business. If we had listened to our critics in previous years and spent more and borrowed more, we wouldn't have been able to do those things. And it pains me that our critics did so well in the last election and we didn't do better, but I have to just get over that, and I have gotten over it. I think there's no doubt that we're in a much better position now than we would have been had we pursued their policies in the past couple of years. So as I say, this response to this recession is totally different. We're able to mount a counter-cyclical response. Instead of having to cut back on spending and increase taxes, we're able to do the reverse in order to cushion the blow for people, particularly those who've lost their jobs, and also to help businesses to survive. Because one of the terrible things about the last recession is that so much of our business infrastructure failed, particularly the construction sector. And when we needed them 2 or 3 years later, they weren't there. We needed them to build houses and infrastructure, and they weren't there. So we're determined that doesn't happen this time, that as many businesses as possible will survive the next few months, that will have that infrastructure of small businesses, tourism enterprises, transport enterprises, you name it, ready to catch the upward wave, which I think we'll see next year, provided we get a deal on Brexit and provided the vaccine works and is rolled out quickly. And I think both those things are more likely than not. So among the kind of things we've done, which you'll know about, is a temporary wage subsidy scheme that helped 66,000 employers, followed up by the employment wage subsidy scheme. That's helped about 41,000 employers. There's a debt warehousing, restart grants, the COVID restriction support scheme, the CRIS, which is now in place for businesses that have to close as a result of restrictions, the commercial rates waiver, which ran from March to December. We're looking at what we'll do for Q1 of next year. Different options being worked up, but haven't made a decision on that yet. But we do understand that we may need to do something in the area of rates relief for the first quarter of next year as well, but maybe more targeted than in the past. There's a pandemic unemployment payment, which you know about. There's about 350,000 people on that now, but at some point over the course of the last year, over 800,000 people received at least one pandemic unemployment payment. So that gives you an idea of how many people were laid off at some point and how many needed that extra financial support. And I'm glad it was there for them. Then there's the COVID-19 enhanced illness benefit, the special sick pay that we introduced for people who needed it during the pandemic and still do. That's just the timeline of our COVID-19 response. It's hard to believe it, but it wasn't that long ago. Only at the end of February did we have our first case of COVID in Ireland. And then things developed, as you know, a lockdown, reopening, a second lockdown, and in between all that, a budget, a July stimulus, and a new EU budget, which was pretty much confirmed now in the last day or two. I think if we look at our response compared to other countries, you can see from the graph on the left that in terms of grants and financial interventions, we've done relatively well. We've done a lot. If you measured by GNI, measured by GDP, there's a bit less, but still more than most of our peers. On the right, you have loans, and we haven't done as much in terms of loans. Or what I should say is there hasn't been as much uptake in terms of loans because while we have a lot of loan guarantee products, the uptake has been relatively small. Good for Microfinance Ireland, Future Growth Loan Scheme, and to lesser extent Brexit, not great on the COVID SBCI at the moment. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. But that is still there if needed and will stay there well into next year for businesses that do need to borrow money. In terms of the public finances, you can see from that the trend line on the graph is just our 10-year yield. We can borrow at the moment pretty much at 0%, which is great. But we're not so naive as to think that will be the case forever. And as you all know, as people in business, debts, if not repaid, they have to be refinanced. And governments tend not to pay down debts so much. What we do is roll them over and refinance them. And at the moment, we have a big stock of debt at a very low interest rate. But a risk in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time is that we'll have to roll that over. And we'll roll it over and refinance it at a much higher interest rate at that point in time, and that's just money out. You know, it's something we want to avoid. So we do need to get the deficit under control. And maybe not next year, but certainly from 2022 onwards, so that when we have to refinance that big stock of debt in a few years' time, we're in a strong position, we're back in surplus, we'll get a decent interest rate, and we'll have the surplus to pay the interest. We won't have to find the money elsewhere through taxes or public spending reductions. Obviously, all of this is underpinned by the European Central Bank, and I think it was Bill Clinton who once said that if he could be reincarnated, he'd be reincarnated as the bond market, because that way you'd have real power. And I think politicians sometimes feel about that. We're very vulnerable to what happens on the global bond markets, particularly when you're running a deficit. So the policy of the central banks now is to effectively print money and lend it out at very low rates, but that won't be the case forever, and we have to be wise to that. I do believe that next year is going to be the year of recovery. We'll see what happens in terms of a Brexit deal, but 50-50, but I still think it'll happen on balance. Light's very much at the end of the tunnel now, I think, with regard to COVID. Although the next few months will be rocky, you would expect by March, April, there'll be enough people who've had the vaccine by then that it will affect case numbers favorably, mortality rates, and then we can start to make decisions around reopening that we can't make now. So I think it will be the year of recovery because of the vaccine, because we'll have some certainty, I believe, around Brexit, but also a big increase in public spending, 10 billion euro capital budget for next year, the biggest ever. We may have difficulties spending that due to constraints in the construction sector and planning problems, but the money is there and we want to spend it. We've set aside 3.4 billion in a recovery fund to help stimulate domestic demand. Haven't decided how that's going to be deployed yet, but that will be there to help the economy recover. It may, for example, be used to do things like extend the commercial rates waiver in some way. It might be used to extend the employment wage subsidy scheme, for example, or CRIS. We know they're all supposed to end at the end of March, but I think we appreciate that certain businesses in certain sectors will need financial support beyond that further into the summer, and that's why we've set aside that reserve. And we've also set aside some contingency funding that we might need for Brexit or for the pandemic unemployment payment if that needs to be extended beyond March too. We will get about 800 million from the Next Generation EU Recovery and Resilience Funds. In many ways, that's our own money because we're now net contributors to the European budget. But it is money that we're going to get, and we really want to make sure we use that in ways that help make the economy and our society more resilient in the future. So things like investment in public transport, climate action, digitalization of our public services, lots of different ideas as to how we'll spend that. There is the 5 billion euro Brexit adjustment reserve. We don't get all of that, but we will get a big chunk of it. And that'll be there to help our farmers and fishermen and exporters, depending on what the shape of the trade deal looks like. So a lot of money is going to be spent by government and the European Union next year. And I really think that will help us to bring about a very strong recovery next year, assuming external factors don't blow us off course for some reason. Just a little mention of the retail sector. As you know, we have a Minister for Retail now for the first time, Business Employment and Retail, and that's Minister English. And he's doing a lot of work now on Brexit preparedness, as am I. And we've seen great success, I think, in the various trading online vouchers and the online retail schemes. And we're keen to continue that over the course of this government to help more businesses to embrace click and collect online. All of that, it is the future, and there will be further funding for that. And we're also strongly supporting the Look for Local campaign through local enterprise offices, including Fingal, and Oisin Geoghegan's been involved in that too. So really keen to push that and encourage people to support their local business. A quick mention of Project Ireland 2040. That's our national spatial strategy and development plan. It's 116 billion euros being invested in infrastructure between 2018 and 2027. As part of the new government, we've now decided to bring forward the midterm review of that, and it's now underway. And we're going to extend the timeline to 2030. And that's designed so that we can include more projects. It's not about deleting projects. It's about including more. And also the timeline has shifted on some of them for various different reasons. So it'll take account of that as well. I think it's fair to say that among the projects that are going to be really important for Fingal is Metro. Eamon Ryan is the Transport Minister, and I'm the Taoiseach, and both of us have been involved in this project for as long as we can remember. He was a big advocate of it the last time he was in government. I had to suspend it when I was Transport Minister, but got it going again as Taoiseach. And we're really keen that we break out of the stop-start cycle on that project and get it started. It's not going to happen quickly, but we really want to get it done because it's going to be transformational for our region, and you all know why that is, and we're very keen to get it done. Also of huge importance to the Dublin 15 area is the electrification, turning that train line into a DART service. And that's probably a little bit more ahead than people think because the electric carriages are on order, and it can be used as a hybrid railway, electric and diesel, before it goes fully electric. And that will allow much more frequent services, new stations along those lines, and will ensure, I think, that future development happens along those lines rather than along our roadways, which is really important. So as somebody who bought my apartment beside Cooney train station 14 years ago, believing it was a good buy because we'd have a DART by now, I'm a bit disappointed we don't, but one of these days we will. And I think this is the government that's going to make it happen. Dublin Airport, I know, the huge economic driver of the region, and a place that I really love. I loved aviation when I was Minister of Transport. I've still kept involved and interested in it. And you know, the airport had a rough couple of years after the last recession, really bounced back, did phenomenally well. DA is a great company, one of our best semi-states, I think, in terms of its flexibility and innovation. And I'm really devastated to see how hard it's been hit by the pandemic. But there is a way back. We have a funding package in place for aviation, including capital works for some of the airports, a rebate of airport charges for the new year. So airlines will still pay landing charges, but they will be rebated by government for the first few months. We're in advanced negotiations now with Aer Lingus around some financial support for them. And we have adopted the European traffic light system, which should enable a return to international travel next year. The big problem that we have, though, is the map, and you can see the map there, and pretty much all of Europe is in red. America certainly is in red. So the whole idea of a traffic light system is to move towards safe travel, but travel isn't that safe when people are coming from red countries into our country, which is yellow, and that's just the reality of it. And testing does not eliminate the risk. It reduces the risk, but does not eliminate it. And we do know that part of the reason why a second wave occurred across Europe was because so many people traveled during the summer. And we just have to be honest and realistic about that. What I would hope and expect to see is that as we enter the spring and summer, a lot of those places that are now red will be yellow or green, and will be green, and that will allow travel to resume. And I do think there will be pent-up demand for travel, and it's possible that aviation might bounce back a little bit quicker than people are now projecting. And Ryanair's recent investment, I think, might be a signal that they think so too. And I do think we will be able to move to antigen testing, which is cheaper and quicker, not as good as PCR, but cheaper and quicker, and is getting better all the time. But we need to be very frank with people. Getting a negative PCR test or antigen test does not mean that you don't have COVID. So it doesn't eliminate the risk. It just reduces it. But it's a very different risk profile if Europe is in green and amber, not in red the way it is now. So that's my presentation. Very happy to hear your thoughts and questions, comments, answers, and really look forward to working with you and other chambers around the country over the next 2 years in my role as Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment.
Thanks, Tánaiste. Lots of figures, and I think you've hit lots of the areas of interest, from the metro to the airport to you know, what might happen early next year as well. Yeah, just to go back, so we had lots of debate on Fingal Dublin versus Fingal Chamber Dublin. You know, it was one of those big topics. You know, we came to the conclusion, if you live in Fingal, you understand what Fingal is. If you're outside of Fingal, and we had some discussions with Seattle Chamber, you know, they probably don't know what Fingal is, but they know at least where Dublin is. So it was an interesting debate, and your comments there are interesting. Let me start off. We have a series of questions, but I might start with a few you know, not necessarily business one. So one of my memories from the lockdown was your speech in March, you know, telling us about, you know, what we needed to do. If you were to think of this year, what's one of your key memories? Like, you know, if you would look back in the future and sort of reflect on, um, you know, what's a highlight or a memory or something that really sticks in your mind?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few given the unprecedented year that we've had. I do remember in Washington when I was there before St. Patrick's Day to meet President Trump and do the St. Patrick's Day visit. We were at an Ireland Funds dinner, and the Secretary General of the Government, Martin Fraser, came up to me to say we need to get you out of here. And we kind of left early. I'd done my speech and everything by then, but we left early. Went through the kitchens, was bundled upstairs, you know, to get the news from Dublin as to what NPHET were recommending. We thought it was coming in terms of having to close schools and introduce restrictions. Didn't necessarily think it would happen like that. And you often see those scenes in TV, you know, kind of like those West Wing scenes where somebody, you know, tells you some news while you're at a dinner and you get bundled out the back and whisked away by security, and that actually rarely happens in real life in politics, but it does sometimes, and that was definitely one of those moments. And then had to, you know, go back to the Blair House where you stay in Washington, talk to Simon Coveney and Simon Harris, who were holding the fort in Dublin for me, then put together the speech for the next day, which I then relayed on the steps of the Blair House in DC. So I remember that one more than the St. Patrick's Day one, which I think people remember a bit better. So that was definitely an abiding memory. The other one was weeks before that, and this was after the election. You know, probably wasn't in the happiest space personally, and so on. And we had the first meeting of the cabinet subcommittee on COVID, and Tony Hoolan came in, and Phil Nolan, I think, I'm not sure it was Phil at that stage, but Tony and others came in and gave us the full briefing on COVID and the worst case scenarios. And at that time, we were projecting between 20 and 80,000 deaths. We thought at that time 20,000 would be on the lower end of the potential outcomes. And because of what was done and what the country did and Irish society did, we were able to keep the number of deaths to a much lower figure, 2,000, which is still awful, and real people, real families grieving, but a fraction of what it could have been a fraction of what has been in other countries. And then again, during the second wave, no excess deaths at all so far. There have been people who've died of COVID, sadly, in the past few weeks, but so far, no more people have died this winter than any other winter. And that's, you know, down to the fact that the flu season has pretty much not happened because people are social distancing and got the vaccine. And also because many of the people who are passing away from COVID now, you know, are end of life patients. So a very different picture to what we're seeing, I think, in other countries. And it was Irish society at its best, the business community, the public service. If we could be like that all the time, we'd be a wonderful country.
Yes, I think a crisis is good for making us all work together better, you know. You talked a little bit about the plans for next year, and the SME sector is really key for the Fingal area. Could you maybe expand a little bit more on maybe thoughts or plans and how we can support the SME sector to survive, I guess, maybe to the second half of next year when hopefully vaccines will kick in, the economy will start to pick up, you know, hopefully some solutions on Brexit as well, and hopefully a plan there.
Yeah, I think a big part of that, one thing you're going to see in terms of more long-term planning is we'll have the report of the SME and Entrepreneurship Task Force out soon. We may even go to Cabinet on Tuesday. But that's more about a longer-term plan for SMEs. It's about clustering and internationalization and networks and entrepreneurship policy and all of those things, but they're more long-term. I think for most people in business, they're wondering, you know, can they get through the next couple of months and have a good year even in 2021 after a really rotten year. And for me, certainly the main argument that I make at government, and you know, I do get a good hearing for it, is that we need to make sure that we don't withdraw the help that we've put in place for business too soon. And you know, that's, for example, the reduced VAT rates are there, and the 9% one for hospitality will stay through to December next year. We need to make sure that those loans are still available and maybe even improve them and make them more attractive. We're having a discussion at the moment in government about commercial rates for the first quarter and what we might do around that. And then the wage subsidy scheme as well. keeping that in place for long enough, beyond the 31st of March, certainly in some form. And then a particular focus as we get out of this on those particular sectors, the ones that have been hit first, worst, and longest, and that's particularly those sectors, like hospitality, restaurants, tourism, aviation, the events industry, conference organizers. They're going to be struggling long after other areas like retail, construction, manufacturing are operating again quite normally. And I think there's going to need to be more sectoral focus for 2021. That's certainly the way we're thinking.
Yeah, you mentioned tourism and hospitality. So for Fingal, that's a big area. We estimate maybe 25% of the chamber members are in that sector. I think they've struggled quite a bit this year also with, I guess, what you might describe as, are we going to open? Are we not going to open? And sort of, pre-planning, certainly there seems to be some thoughts of supports for Q1. Do you think they might extend beyond the first quarter of next year, given that sector may be slow to recover?
I don't want to preempt government decisions, but if you're asking me my opinion, for those sectors, yes. And that is why we set aside the income contingency and the recovery fund, in recognition of the fact that our core scenario, like the virus does what it wants and it makes mockeries of our plans. So this could all change, but our kind of, if you take the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, and you take the kind of middle core scenario in between, we would still think that for the first 3 months of this year, social distancing and restrictions are going to be part of our lives. Maybe tighter restrictions for a period in January, February, hopefully easing them then as we go into the spring and summer. But it could be well into the summer, before we see people going back to matches or being able to, allow restaurants to have more tables and, all those things, those events and festivals that drive trade and football. So, and the return of tourism too. So, it could be well into 2021, and therefore it's really 2022 before you have a real recovery in those sectors, because 2021 isn't going to be a bumper year. It might be an okay year for those sectors, but not a bumper year. And that's why we'd be, minded to not withdraw those financial supports from those sectors too soon. Yep,
no, I quite understand. You mentioned the airport. You showed us the map as well. A lot of red on that map, unfortunately. I think we all welcome the traffic light system. It's consistent as well. Anything else you think we can be doing, though? And you also mentioned, the sort of faster testing as well, or cheaper testing as well, I think, which will all help. But given that the airport is a fundamental driver of both access and transport, but also, economic activity in the Fingal area as well, lots of people employed there, lots of people associated with it. Any other thoughts in terms of anything else the government might be thinking about to try to help that sector?
I think there's a fair bit in place already. I kind of mentioned that there's discussions with Aer Lingus about financial support for them, but they're confidential and commercial, so I can't tell you any more than the fact that they're well underway. And there is the airport charges rebate for the airport. So airlines will land for free for the first time ever in Dublin Airport for the next couple of months. And that, I think, will encourage them to get services back up and running again. And obviously then, in addition to that, the aviation companies and the companies that support them, like MRO and so on, they do avail of the wage subsidy scheme. Indeed, among the biggest beneficiaries of the wage subsidy scheme are big companies like airlines and some of the semi-states. So a lot of that is in place. But I think the main thing that we need to do for that sector is to allow people to travel again. This is not a sector that wants subsidies. This is a sector that wants people to return to normal business. And I think that is going to be possible. The vaccine, rapid testing, the spring and summer itself, coronavirus has a seasonal component to it. I kind of regret that we weren't able to do some level of travel, more travel last summer, although it probably was for the best, given it probably contributed to a lesser second wave in Ireland. I'd like in the summer people to be able to travel overseas again and not feel bad about it. I want to do it myself. I'd like to see a return of people coming to Dublin for short breaks and to Ireland. But I think a lot of the travel that we're going to see in 2021 is going to be within Europe. Long haul is going to be difficult and might take a bit longer.
Sure, no, I understand. I think the government did a great job with the COVID pandemic subsidy, but do you worry about long-term unemployment, especially at the youth or sort of graduate level? And part of our feedback from our members is that they're finding it difficult to get staff because maybe the incremental above the COVID payment for working isn't that high anymore. So how does the government sort of think about how do we encourage people to get back to work where there are jobs available, and at the same time the government do the best they can to support people who can't find work?
Yeah, and we always have to be wary of that balance, to make sure that we maintain a strong incentive to take up employment where it's available. And the rules of the pandemic unemployment payment are very clear. You have to be available for work. If your job is offered to you to go back to, you're supposed to go back to it, or you lose eligibility. I know it's difficult for employers. Employers don't want to be reporting people to the Department of Social Protection for not taking up jobs or not going back to their jobs, but the rules of the scheme are clear. And it will be phased out at some point, certainly as the economy recovers. What's interesting about the pandemic unemployment payment is that, as I mentioned earlier, 800,000 people at some point availed of it this year. But the number of people who are on it since March is much lower. It's only about 150,000. So that would indicate to me, and they must be mostly in sectors that haven't reopened. Like in tourism, hospitality, and events. So that does indicate to me that the vast majority of people, when offered employment or when offered their job back, will take it back. But there are a group of people, about 100,000 or so, 150,000, who haven't had the opportunity to return to work. And the focus, certainly, of the Department of Social Protection is going to be on them next year in helping them to find employment, alternative employment, reskill, all of those things. But it's a much smaller number when you think about it. In around 150,000. And while you'll hear a huge amount in the media about youth unemployment, actually, generally what happens in a recession is youth unemployment soars, and in a recovery, it goes way down. The people who you tend to worry about more in terms of long-term unemployment are people kind of 35, 40, 50, and particularly men, because often they're the ones who, if they lose their job, they struggle to get a new one. So it's never gets discussed much in the media, but that's the pattern of recessions. Is that a young person loses their job, gets it back relatively quickly, are very flexible in terms of retraining and moving sector. A man in his 50s, much more difficult. We need to look out for them as well.
Yep, thank you. Brexit, the topic of the moment, so I guess we entered the year thinking Brexit, then we moved to COVID, and it became the defining term, and now we're probably back to Brexit again with good hope in terms of what might happen. Do you think the government are doing enough or could do more? I guess business is worried about, the procedures or the increased paperwork associated with customs, but also tariffs as well. And I know this is very hard to predict. It's almost a gambling game at the moment, which way it might go. But people, I think, in business are always optimistic that there will be a solution and a deal done because it's in everyone's interests. Any sort of thoughts in terms of where we are, where we might be going, and if there is a no deal in the short term, what the things the government can do to help?
Yeah, well, I think it's always important to say that, deal or no deal, things are going to be different on the 1st of January. I know we've been talking about Brexit for so long that maybe sometimes people get sick of hearing about it and sort of take the view it'll be all right on the night and nothing will really change in practice. And very little changed when they left because of the transition period. They are gone. They're gone nearly a year now. But what will happen on the 1st of January is they will leave the single market and the customs union, deal or no deal. And that means things are going to be different for people trading with Britain, not with Northern Ireland, but for people trading with Britain. There will be declarations to fill in, bureaucracy, administrative costs. checks and controls. And I'd really encourage anyone who hasn't thought about that yet, you need to think about it really soon and use our department's Brexit readiness checker online. That'll go through all the things that you need to think about and also will signpost you to where you can get help, whether it's grants for a customs staff member or whether it's advice and training. It is all available. Although I do know there's a real shortage of people in the country who have the skills to do customs because nobody's been doing it really for the past 25 years. And that's going to be a difficulty. But I think in the first couple of months anyway, there will be not so much a grace period, but there will be a large degree of understanding that businesses will need time to adapt. You know, kind of a grace period is not correct because that implies that things won't be enforced. They will be, but there'll be a degree of flexibility, I think, in the first 2 weeks and months around how all these things are managed. But the bigger issue is the tariffs. That's the real worry people have. The impact that tariffs would have on trade, and that is unknowable at this stage. Like I say, we have set aside a contingency in the budget to help out those sectors most affected, but you know, that can't last forever. And if we are facing very large tariffs on certain exports and imports, you can mitigate that for a while, but only for a while. And that's why the other things like diversification and alternative markets could become really important next year.
Yeah,
hopefully that will not be a problem and things will be worked out by the weekend.
Yes, actually, we're all with you on that one, and hoping for a positive outcome. In addition to tariffs, do you worry about, let's say, labour costs as well, that it may be more difficult for service providers in Fingal and the rest of Ireland to compete with service providers in Northern Ireland or in the UK?
I suppose that's an issue already, really, isn't it? Because you know, wages tend to be lower and pay is lower in Northern Ireland. And in some parts of the UK. So that could be an issue, and a lot will depend on what happens with currency, you know, whether sterling goes up or down. If there's a deal, I expect sterling will go up, which might actually help us in terms of competitiveness. But yeah, that is a concern. But I don't ever think the solution would be trying to chase them downwards on wages. You know, low pay has costs as well, and big costs for government. You know, we want to be a high pay economy.
Yes, I understand. Trade fairs are important. Let's say trade fairs and exhibitions are important for the SME sector. You know, they've stopped this year for the obviously reasons in terms of COVID. Do you see us getting back to some of those in some form, maybe in the second half of next year?
Yeah, I hope so, and maybe even before that. The sector's been very engaged with Minister Troy in my department, and I know they're very keen to be able to put on some form of exhibitions and fairs next year. You know, to a certain extent, depending on the nature of the event, it's not all that different to what's happening now at the museums and the art galleries that are open again. And what we had kind of factored into the existing plan in COVID is that at level 2 and certainly level 1, you would be able to go ahead with exhibitions and trade fairs, but there would be all sorts of controls. You know, obviously limited numbers and hand sanitization, all those things that have to be done. So you know, I think level two is very realistic for some time in the spring or summer. Wouldn't be back to full on busy trade fairs, but you know, you could see it's starting with limited numbers and so on.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the chat here. So there's a question just around the credit guarantee scheme, and you know, the sort of you know, first of all complimenting it, but then just sort of limit it to 25% of the previous year's turnover. Could you maybe just comment anything you can say around the credit guarantee scheme as we go forward, and has it been considered in any other format or being looked at?
Yeah, like the uptake has been relatively low. You know, there's 2 billion available to borrow, and only a couple of 100 million has been drawn down so far. And we're kind of looking at the reasons around that now. Sometimes it's because businesses don't need it. Other businesses don't want to take on debt. That's fine. We totally understand that. But there is some evidence, although it's only anecdotal, I haven't been able to prove it yet, that some tourism and hospitality businesses that want to borrow and need to borrow are finding it hard to get banks to lend the money, even with that 80% guarantee in place, because there's such uncertainty about that sector that banks are saying that your asset, your hotel or whatever, isn't sufficient collateral. So that's kind of one thing we're kind of examining at the moment. And we're always open to modifying the scheme to make it more attractive. But we don't want to go down the UK route where it was 100% guarantee, huge amounts of money was lent out. Most would just end up on deposit, so it was no particular good to the economy. And it looks like the taxpayer is going to be on the hook for quite a lot of it, because understandably, if you give the banks 100% guarantee, they've no skin in the game, and they will lend to businesses that can't pay it back, and that's not in the public interest.
And there's one other question there. It's related to Brexit. It's a concern about the potential for tariffs on services. What's your understanding of the potential for tariffs on services? And I know this is tied up in whatever may come out of the deal, but right now, assuming no deal, is that a possibility?
That's a good question. I'd have to check with you on that. Like, when we talk about tariffs, they're almost always on goods. There will be other restrictions that I think will be of more impact in terms of services. It'll be the non-tariff barriers that could be a problem in services. For example, if we don't have a deal, the UK saying that only British companies can tender for X, Y, or Z government service. I think that's the kind of barriers to trade that we would seek to avoid in any trade deal. Tariffs themselves, maybe not so much, but there could be other forms of tax and other forms of barriers.
Thank you. So I think we've come to the end of the Q&A. Tánaiste, I'd like to thank you for taking the time. I know you must have to be extremely busy with everything that's going on. It's been great to have you here, given your leadership in government, and also the fact that you're in Fingal, and that it's and we're all either working or living in Fingal. I'm going to hand over to Anthony Cooney, CEO of the Chamber, to say a few final words. But let me just finally thank you, and now hand over to Anthony.
Thanks, Bill. Merry Christmas.
And same to you.
And I'd just like to thank the Tánaiste and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment, Leo Varadkar, for today. It was a terrific session, and thank you for being so forthright and forthcoming with the answers to the questions we posed. And in particular, on behalf of all the business members, thanks for your support for the business sector. Certainly in the last 9 months, it's been exemplary. We've got great support from government. I would say to our members, this event has been organised by the Fingal Chamber in conjunction with our Fingal Chamber Skillnet, who's been a great partner with us for the last 18 months, almost 2 years. It's going to be giving great benefit to the businesses in Fingal by being able to train people in their places of employment. If you find this event useful, please let us know. You get an email after this event, and there's a comment section. Please let us know what you think. If you can refer a colleague or another business to be a member of the Chamber, it'd be fantastic. We also have a small token of appreciation for those who do help us get more members. In relation to members, we represent over 400 members in the Fingal region, and business members, just over 25% of which are in the D15 area. So it's quite a number. So, and also in relation to other events, you can look up our website, fingaldublinchamber.ie. It'll be changing in January, of course, to fingalchamber.ie. So, and I'd like to thank our communications and events manager, David, and our Skillnet manager, Fergal Malone, for organising this event. So if you're enjoying our work, please let us have a review on our Google or on our Facebook page. And I'd like to wish everybody, and Tánaiste, yourself in particular, a very happy Christmas, and hope all goes well over the next couple of days for Brexit, and I'm sure it'll exercise everybody's mind. But I'd like to wish everybody a happy Christmas. Thanks for signing in today. Thanks for coming along, and stay safe. Agus slán go fóill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tánaiste.